sort of lucky enough to get to Dick Cheney, who is one of the people who's rumored to know what's going on. And what I always say to people, whether you're talking to a president, a vice president, a 4-star general with a unified command, those are the people who are supposed to know. If you get in contact with one of those people, what you don't want to ask them is, what do you think about UFOs? Have you had a UFO experience? What you want to ask them is, did you ever receive a briefing on UFOs?
Yes.
Because the briefing is somebody's going to come in, they're going to sign papers, and they're going to tell you what is the official truth, not some disinformation. You're going to get the official briefing. What does the government know on this subject? So that was the question I asked Larson. That's the question I asked in the FOIAs. Were there briefings? Where did the briefings come? Who briefed them? What were the documents? And establish that whole thing. Now, they're playing the little game. It's been 20 days. They haven't even acknowledged that I've sent the FOIA. So now I'm going to file the appeals. We'll go through this whole nonsense thing.
Right.
And I'll try to make it as public as possible that they're stonewalling and they're playing little games. But Larson, to me, is just simply, in terms of this latest one, it's just a simple guy who's doing his job. He's not a scientist. He's an engineer. And he's only got a bachelor's degree.
Yes.
He's a low level, do nothing, but he's a public relations officer. He's not a scientist. He's not.
Right.
They've got him down as an assistant researcher. He's not. He's a public relations officer. So he's basically, this is what we want you to put out. Somebody else is giving him the direction as to what to put in there, and he just writes it up. If you go to the website, the OSTP website, you'll see he writes articles on all sorts of different subjects for them. It's not that he knows anything, and I doubt he knows anything about UFOs. Plus, if he's coming from a scientific or a scientific angle, he can't sort of go across this thing where he talks about the distances are too great. So he believes this worldview
Right.
that the world is a materialistic place. You can't go past the speed of light. Therefore, you aliens and can't be here. It's impossible. The other thing about Larson that I pointed out that's important that people have to remember is that he's got a Mars background. That he worked on this Mars project. So now
Really?
we just sent a Mars probe to Mars, $1 billion over budget, $2.5 billion. If the White House or Larson were to admit that there is any sort of evidence on Earth that we should look at for extraterrestrials, who's going to put another $2.5 billion to send another probe to Mars to drill some more holes in rocks? I mean, that's total nonsense.
Right.
We
Right.
would know that maybe it's here. So they're not going to make the acknowledgement that there's any chance that there is evidence here that ETs, because everything becomes a jeopardy. The space program, this latest Kepler 22b
Sure it
thing,
does.
it's all a bunch of nonsense. It's all like make work project. If the government makes any sort of admission that there's any possibility that any of this is true. So they have to play this game, and they played it with the Rockefellers. And if you see with, I mentioned that it started back in the Carter days with Press, who was the science advisor there. He goes to NASA, and if you've seen all the correspondence inside NASA, they're saying not in a million years. He cut our budget by $5 billion. Does this guy think we're nuts? We want this PR nightmare on our hands. We're not talking. We're not going to deal with it. And so you nicely write a letter back to the president. You play the little game. You know, if you've got some hard evidence, we'll look at it. But really, we don't have the time or the money
Right.
and that's how the game is played. It's a government game where I've always said that the number one thing that people have to realize is it all comes down to elections, voting, people getting in, that everything is so orchestrated inside the White House that issues that I don't know if you're familiar with the Keystone Pipeline coming out of Canada that Obama's just made this big decision on.
Yeah.
Where he postponed it till after the election. He didn't cancel it. He didn't allow it to go, but he canceled it because a bunch of people went outside the White House, 200 people, and got themselves arrested, or 300.
And that was what he was, yeah, I read that in that article that you sent me. That was the first time I'd seen it. And yeah, the thing that really jumped out was the guy would rather not create 10,000 jobs just to save his own.
And that's exactly what it comes down to. And I think anybody who looks at ufology has to keep that in mind, that when you're talking to politicians, you are talking to somebody who is, number one thing, if you take a look at how they deal with the president, there's hundreds of people around the president who are watching every little thing that goes on and how everything looks and whether people have ties on and just bizarre things, where the president stands, who stands behind him. It's just so orchestrated to make the president look good and to keep it all like the president's got everything under control. And so I think at the presidential level with all this stuff, we're sort of just spinning our wheels, that it really doesn't work. And I was talking to Billy Cox the other day, and if my article, I've sent you the first part 3 of the article is what I think would work. If you look back in ufology and you look at all the things that have worked, the highlights of ufology, the times when we've got the congressional studies and things have happened, it's always been at a local level. And the problem is that at a presidential level, you have no political cover. When Stephen Greer had his disclosure conference in 2001, he went up onto the Hill and he talked to all the congressmen and the senators. When James Fox did his big documentary, the second one, the big one, he went up on the Hill and he gave all his documentary to all the congressmen and the senators. And both those people were told the same thing, is basically the idea, you get the parade going, and then we'll join and we'll lead the parade.
Right.
But they need political cover. And if you're in the White House, if you can see from Kucinich is running for president, and he gets asked this question. He gets sideswiped with this question about UFOs, and his campaign is over. Everybody just mocks this guy.
For good. Yeah, that's right.
Cover. But if you take a look at the highlights in the UFO in UFO history, you will see that if you get a politician at a local level, you provide him cover. And I can give you a number of examples. You can take a look at the congressional study that was forced by Congressman Gerald Ford. He was under pressure in his local constituency to do something about the UFO sightings in Michigan, and he got a congressional study going because he could say, I don't believe in UFOs, this is all garbage, but my constituent here, these people want answers, and I'm fighting on their behalf. He's got political cover. The same thing happened, I don't know if you were familiar with Harrison Schmitt, who was one of the men who walked on the moon, Senator Harrison Schmitt. He had an actual open study or a hearing on cattle mutilations because he was the senator in New Mexico and they had all these cattle mutilations and he was under tremendous pressure to do something, and he had the congressional study. Schiff, the Congressman Schiff, was under pressure. He was the New Mexico congressman. He was under pressure about Roswell. He went and he got the whole Roswell reinvestigated twice, 1994 and 1997. And that was on a local level. He could say, I really don't believe in UFOs, but these people here want something done. And there's all sorts of examples. When Lazar, the Area 51 thing, when he went to court on a pandering charge in 1991, a lot of people don't know that the congressman, Bill Bray, was in court with him, that he had given him a recommendation in court that this guy was being contacted by George Knapp, and he was trying to run background investigations on Lazar to get answers to a number of the questions about was Lazar at Area 51. So if you can get a congressman at a local level, you are going to give him political cover, and that's where I think things will get done. I think at the federal level, at the president, there's too much concern about being reelected, and it's all about votes. At the local level, the guy gets the idea, these are my constituents, and if the word spreads around that I'm not doing what they're asking me to do, I'm gone. You can put pressure on him that unless you answer these questions and do something for us as constituents, we're not going to vote you back in. So that's what it comes down to me is this political cover aspect.
That's pretty interesting. I hadn't actually thought of it specifically that way, although I've heard you talk about some of those examples before. But yeah, basically that makes a lot of sense because in essence, what you're saying is that Bassett and anybody else that's kind of going direct to the White House, they're sort of shooting too high. They're aiming for too high of a mark. Maybe if they took that exact same thing to, again, to repeat what you're saying, a local level, maybe a congressional level, they might get a lot more of what they're looking for and be able to put a couple of those together.
Yeah, and yet they're doing what they think is right. I mean, I would have thought the same thing too. I really didn't even realize this until just recently, this fact that if you look back at the local level, you're going to get a lot more success. And the prime example is Richardson, who ran for president, who was the governor of New Mexico, and he had actually wrote the introduction to the Roswell dig book. He was really pro Roswell, but you could see what happens when he's talking about his constituents, he's doing it, but then when he gets on the political, the federal, and he's running for president, suddenly the same night that Kucinich is asked the question at the Democratic debate, they turn around and they say to Richardson, what about you? Do you believe in UFOs? And you can see at that point he's running for president, and suddenly he turns on the UFO community that he defended for so many years and said, well, no, to me it's just, I don't believe in UFOs. It's just tourism to me and stuff like this. And his political cover is gone, and he's trying to get reelected, and he basically dumps all the people that he was supporting up until that point. So you can see the difference between when he's a local guy and when he's running for president. There's
very
two different guys altogether.
Let me ask you this question then. Have you had this discussion with Steve Bassett? Have you explained this point to him and discussed this?
No, I as I said, I only recently discovered this when I was looking at this whole thing. And in part 3, when you see my part 3, I name a lot, and there's a lot more. There's Senator Dodd. There's a bunch of them where
there is a lot more, right? Even I know that, and I haven't done all the research you have.
Yeah, but that only occurred to me recently. And as I said, like Steve and Dolan and all these people are doing only what they think is right. The same as I was, putting pressure on the White House to give answers and stuff like that. And it may just be because after so many years of doing it, I've sort of got frustrated at how they can sort of walk around the issues, like the Bill Clinton thing, for example. Bill Clinton, when I lectured in Little Rock one time, there's a woman in the audience came up to me who claimed her sister owned this famous barbecue restaurant where the Clintons used to hang out. And she said that the reason the Clintons are so interested in UFOs, either they or someone very close to them had a UFO sighting at that barbecue restaurant. So I knew that the Clintons were very interested, and Bill even admitted to Paul Davids that he was fascinated with the subject. So we knew that they were interested, but when it came to the UFO thing, then it was sort of like, this is an issue we really don't want to get stuck with. And when I went after John Podesta's 50th birthday party photographs, I know after the appeal that the appeal went to Bruce Lindsay, who was Clinton's lawyer, and Clinton himself, and they absolutely exempted everything. They they denied my request for everything in the request. So here's Bill protecting his own image, even though he's very interested. He doesn't want to get stuck with this controversy. So you can be very interested as Jimmy Carter was or Bill Clinton was, and you can still turn on the UFO community and play the skeptic. As if you've heard the Carter interview, where Carter now is stating, "I do not believe extraterrestrials came to Earth. I don't believe it at all."
Right.
And so he's gone from what we used to think was the UFO president and this great guy who was on our side to a guy who shows up on a skeptical radio show